Hi, it's Steph from thisiscolorado.net, Season 1, Episode 11. Welcome to our podcast. On today's episode, instead of we, it will just be me. Mike is off today because we couldn't figure out our schedules to meet up together. Sometimes that happens, we're both pretty busy. So, anyway, I hope you enjoy the show with just me. Today, I'm going to focus on some awesome things to do here in Colorado in the fall. Some are free, some are cheap, and some require a few funds. All of the sources will, of course, be linked in the show notes. Since I'm flying solo, I'll just share a few things I've been up to since our last episode. I checked out a restaurant that I'd never been to in Littleton called Cafe Terracotta. Cafe Terracotta. It was yummy, and I'll go again. I went to another show at the Ogden Theater, which is always a good venue for a rowdy night out with friends. That night we also finished up at One Up, which is a bar and arcade, and that was really fun because they have so many of the cool arcade games I remember either playing at the arcade or on Nintendo when I was a kid, and so I had a good time. It was really, really fun. In addition to a fun night out, my family and I also went to the Rock Creek Farm Pumpkin Patch up in Broomfield. We've gone there for years because it's close and it's pretty cheap entertainment, which is great when you've got kids because things get expensive. Typically, we head there, we pick out our pumpkins, and then we go to the kids' entertainment area. They usually have like a hay bale maze set up for the kids to play on and in. They also usually have a jumpy castle or one of those big blow-up slides that you gotta climb up. So we played in both of those this year. They also have a few animals in their pens for everyone to get close and see. They do like to nip, though. There's a couple signs up not to put your hands in there, and I would advise you listen. They also this year had those plastic balls that you can get inside and roll around in, like a hamster. We skipped those ones, but maybe next year. But we did pick up some pumpkin bread, and that was to benefit the Birds of Prey Foundation, which is a win-win if you ask me. So, as far as news goes, I wanted to talk about the creepy clown sightings that have been happening in several states this year, and even had a few pop up here in Colorado. I'm not personally afraid of clowns, and I think it's all just a lame way to get attention. Attention for what? I don't know. But it is what it is. You know, anytime you're out being creepy on purpose, you really legit have the ability to make someone feel threatened. So I guess just a word of caution, not maybe the smartest use of time. There's been a couple of threats made on social media from the clowns or people, doing this crap, but the local police say that most of them are unsubstantiated. One threat from a high school girl here in Colorado ended up with her getting some criminal charges, so maybe not the best idea to be threatening things on social media, FYI. On the lighter side of things, a fun activity to do is to check out coloradohauntedhistory.com. They currently offer 2 tours, and you can contact and set one up by visiting their site, calling or emailing them. You have the option of the Ghosts and Legends Tour in Morrison, and that takes about an hour and a half, and the Murder, Mayhem, and Madness Tour in Golden that runs 2 hours. To take the tour costs $15 for adults, $10 for kids, 12 and under. Discounts are available for groups of 10 or more, so grab some friends and go get spooked. The site also has links for another similar group in Manitou Springs, so it looks like we've got the north side and the south side covered. I've not gone to one of these before, but I've seen their advertising quite a bit, and I'm definitely interested in going. It just didn't work out this season, so hopefully next year I'll actually have something to tell you about it. I wanted to talk about today all the cool things that I could think of to do in Colorado in the fall, and I'm sure there's more, so if you know of something I've missed, please let me know. I'm always up for new adventures and places to explore. So for the free things to do, relatively free anyway, I guess I should put a caveat in there. If you don't have a car and gas, it might be a little hard to do a scenic drive. But maybe you've got some dough stashed away and you could pay an Uber or a Lyft driver. Who knows? I don't know. You could get creative. But, barring that, it's pretty free. So scenic drives or checking out the beautiful fall colors at locations like Garden of the Gods, Red Rocks, Lookout Mountain, Pikes Peak, all of those places are free to access. So, there's that. You could also drive around and check out the Halloween lawn decorations in the burbs. I don't know if a lot of other places do that, but it seems to me like our Halloween decorations, the frequency with which you see them almost rivals the Christmas decoration season. So, a lot of people put a lot of effort into some of these displays, so they're definitely worth checking out. Let's see what else. I wanted to mention the harvest festivals. It's, the end of summer, beginning of fall, and several of the smaller towns and cities surrounding Denver have these harvest festivals. You could check out the Elk Fest in Estes Park, or enjoy those Indian summer days at any number of the local city parks, since we have thousands of them. Fall is a great time to get outside. It's not too hot, it's not too cold. It's, you can spend some time out there, so it's good. You could also spook yourself at a cemetery. I've done that a few times growing up. You don't have money to go to haunted houses and stuff like that always, so you got to make your own fun. So that's cool. Go check out a cemetery. Just be respectful so a ghost doesn't take that as an invitation of sorts to follow you home and be disrespectful to you there. Also, Denver Arts Week is a great way to see some of the area's art exhibits and museums for free. This year it runs November 4th through the 12th, so that's free, so check it out. In the cheap to-do category, we have the Denver International Wine Festival, and that goes from November 2nd through the 4th. You'll have to go to their website for ticket details and whatnot. But you could also check out the You Pick 'em farms. Like I mentioned, me and my family went and did. You pick up a pumpkin or check out the corn maze. Generally speaking, picking or playing in produce is pretty cheap. I guess maybe that's a nod to our farm heritage here. I don't know. Anyway, you could also pick up Palisade peaches, Rocky Ford melons, Pueblo green chilies, or Olathe sweet corn, because they're all really good. They're all ready to harvest, starting in August. So not exactly fall, more like end of summer, but sometimes in Colorado the weather is crazy, so it could feel like fall then. Anyways, they're definitely all delicious. And if you've never had some, you're missing out. The other thing I found to do is the zombie crawl. I've never been. I've seen pictures from a couple friends. I know Mike's gone. But it's fun to watch and clearly fun to participate in. So make your zombie costume and go. I think it's already passed this year, but maybe next year. There are also several costume parties and even a costume ball in Denver. So if you've never been to a ball, little princess, and you want to go, there's your chance. You can attend. We also have, catch maybe those last flicks at one of the area's drive-in theaters. It's still fun to do, to go sit in the back of your pickup or in the back of your van or whatever and go watch a movie in the middle of a field with a bunch of other people also doing the same thing. It's a good time. For a little bit of dough, you could check out one of the many haunted houses, Boo at the Zoo, trick-or-treat streets. They're all over the place. There's even a trick-or-treat train. I thought that was pretty unique. The Molly Brown House down in Denver has an event where you can hear readings from authors such as Poe, Wells, and Lovecraft. Or as one last getaway before the winter sets in, go stay at a log cabin in the woods. Get one last camping trip in. Light a fire and enjoy the company of those close friends and family before you're stuck next to them and don't enjoy it so much. Of all the fun things to do here in the fall, by far my favorite is learning about the real-life experiences of people who have had brushes with the paranormal. Fall and Halloween are a perfect time to explore that. I've said before that I don't fluently speak in movies like Mike does, even less so with horror movies because they give me nightmares for days. I'm not even kidding. It's really kind of sad. But anyway, I can totally handle listening to people's real accounts, so go figure that one. Anyway, I checked out Legends of America. It's actually a really good site. There's all kinds of information on all kinds of stuffs there, so if you're bored and want something to do, definitely go give them a shout. But I found there a great article by Kathy Weiser titled Ghosts of Cheeseman Park in Denver. And I thought that was perfect for the show since it has both the history and the stories that I love to look into. As the site reads, while taking a stroll upon the rolling hills or having a picnic under the shade of one of the many trees in the beautiful 80-acre Cheeseman Park, many visitors don't realize that they very well may be walking or sitting right upon the grave of one of the many who were buried here in the 19th century. Surrounded by Capitol Hill, mansions in the heart of downtown Denver, Colorado, Cheeseman Park is not only frequented by visitors wanting to explore its botanical gardens or enjoy its 150-mile panoramic view from the pavilion, but it is also said to be the home to a number of restless spirits. The park's history began in 1858 when General William Larimer jumped the claim of the St. Charlestown Company and established his own, which he called Denver. In actuality, the property didn't belong to a town company either. Rather, the land legally belonged to the Arapaho Indians. In November 1858, Larimer set aside 320 acres for a cemetery, which is now the site of present-day Cheeseman and Congress Parks. Larimer called it Mount Prospect Cemetery, and several large plots were designated on the crest of the hill for the exclusive use of the city's wealthy and most influential citizens. The outermost edge of the cemetery was reserved for criminals and paupers, while the middle class were to be interred somewhere in between. The first man buried in the cemetery was named Abraham Kay, who died after being suddenly stricken with a lung infection. He was buried on March 20th, 1859. However, the most often story told of the first person buried was a man hanged for murder, making for a far more interesting tale, and it's become the more preferred version, apparently. The second man buried at the cemetery was a Hungarian immigrant named John Stoffel. Having arrived in Denver to allegedly settle a dispute with his brother-in-law, he ended up shooting the man on April 7, 1859. Both men were gold prospectors, and witnesses believed that Stoffel was really there because he wanted his brother-in-law's gold dust. Because of the nearest official court was in Leavenworth, Kansas, a people's court was assembled, where Stoffel was convicted of murder. On April 9, 1859, he was hanged from a cottonwood tree at the intersection of 10th and Cherry Creek Streets. Though Denver consisted of only 150 buildings at the time, about 1,000 spectators attended the Stoffel hanging. Afterwards, his body, along with his brothers, were dumped into the same grave at the edge of the cemetery. Oh my gosh, Wild West was crazy. Can you imagine? As the outermost edge of the cemetery began to fill with outlaws, vagrants, and paupers, Denver citizens began to call the cemetery the Old Boneyard and Boot Hill. Mount Prospect gained yet another nickname when a popular professional gambler named Jack O'Neill was gunned down outside of a saloon in March 1860. The whole event began when O'Neill, a handsome Irishman, quarreled with a less than credible man who went by the name of Rooker. As the argument progressed, O'Neill suggested the two settle the argument with Bowie knives in the back room. Oh my god, it's so Wild West. Anyway, however, when Rooker refused, O'Neill questioned his heritage as well as that of several of his family members. A couple of days later, Rooker shot O'Neill down as he passed by the door of the Western Saloon. When the Rocky Mountain News printed the story, the cemetery also became known as Jack O'Neill's Ranch. After receiving these many nicknames, the cemetery never gained the respect that Larimer intended for it to have. The influential citizens of Denver society were most often buried elsewhere, leaving the graveyard to burials of the poor, criminal, and diseased. When Larimer eventually left Denver, Mount Prospect was claimed by a cabinet maker named John Wally, who also just happened to be an aspiring undertaker. A report in 1866 stated that 626 persons were buried in the cemetery. Wally did an extremely bad job of keeping up the cemetery, which soon fell into a terrible state of disrepair, as headstones were toppled, graves were vandalized, and sometimes even cattle were allowed to graze upon the land. Some legends even tell of homesteaders who began to live upon the land. Well, I mean, I guess you'd have some pretty quiet neighbors, right? In 1872, the U.S. government determined that the property upon which the cemetery sat was actually federal land, having been deeded to the government in an 1860 treaty by the Arapaho Indians. The government then offered the land to the city of Denver, who purchased it for $200. A year later, the cemetery's name was changed to the Denver City Cemetery. Over time, separate areas of the cemetery were designated for various religious, organizational, and ethnic groups, such as the Odd Fellows, Society of Masons, Roman Catholics, Jewish, and the Grand Army of the Republic, and a faraway segregated section for the Chinese, near the paupers' graves. That seems kind of backhanded. While some of these sections were kept up by family descendants or their organizations, others were terribly neglected. In 1875, 20 acres at the north part of the cemetery were sold to the Hebrew Burial Society, who then maintained it, while much of the rest of the graveyard grew tall with weeds. In 1881, a hospital for those suffering from smallpox was established just south of the Jewish cemetery. The hospital, more often referred to as a pest house, was where smallpox victims were quarantined, along with others having contagious diseases and some that were merely sick, elderly, or handicapped. Most of the patients were simply left at the pest house to die. Good Lord. Behind the building was the Potter's Field section of the graveyard, where the vast majority of the dead were buried in mass graves. Wow, this just keeps getting better, doesn't it? By the late 1880s, the cemetery was seldom used and had fallen into even worse disrepair, becoming a terrible eyesore in what had become one of the most prestigious parts of the city. Real estate developers soon began to lobby for a park rather than an unused cemetery. Before long, Colorado Senator Teller persuaded the U.S. Congress to allow the old graveyard to be converted to a park. On January 25, 1890, Congress authorized the city to vacate Mount Prospect, and in recognition, Teller immediately renamed the area Congress Park. Families were then given 90 days to remove the remains of their departed to other locations. Those who could afford to began to transfer the bodies to other cemeteries throughout the city. Due to the large number of graves in the Roman Catholic section, Mayor Bates sold the 40-acre area to the Archdiocese, which was named the Mount Calvary Cemetery. The Chinese section of the graveyard was placed in the hands of a large population of Chinese who lived in Hop Alley section of Denver. The majority of these bodies were then removed and shipped to their homeland of China. However, most those buried in the cemetery were vagrants, criminals, and paupers. When the majority of bodies remained unclaimed, the city of Denver awarded a contract to undertaker E.P. McGovern to remove the remains in 1893. McGovern was to provide a fresh box for each body, oh my God, and transfer it to the Riverside Cemetery at a cost of $1.90 each. The gruesome work began on March 14, 1893, before an audience of curiosity seekers and reporters. For the first few days, the transfer was orderly. However, the unscrupulous McGovern soon found a way to make an even larger profit on the contract. Oh boy. Rather than utilizing full-size coffins for adults, he used child-size caskets that were just 1 foot by 3.5 feet long. Hacking the bodies up, McGovern sometimes used as many as 3 caskets for just one body. In their haste, body parts and bones were literally strewn everywhere, and in the disorganized mess, souvenir hunters began to loot the open graves and coffins. Oh my God, that's just, wow. Okay. When the Denver Republican got a hold of this story, its headline proclaimed on March 19, 1893, "The Work of Ghouls." The article described in detail McGovern's practice of hacking up what were sometimes intact remains of the dead and stuffing them into undersized boxes. The article in part described the scene thusly. The line of deceased graves at the southern boundary of the cemetery sickened and horrified everybody by the appearance they presented. Around their edges were piled broken coffins, rent and tattered shrouds, and fragments of clothing that had been torn from the dead bodies. and were trampled into the ground by the footsteps of the grave diggers like rejected junk. Oh my God, that's heinous. The health commissioner immediately began an investigation. Well, good job, dude. Into the matter. And as a result, Mayor Rogers terminated the contract. Well done. Afterwards, the city built a temporary wooden fence around the cemetery, leaving it in shambles with open holes still displayed. Though numerous graves had not yet been reached and others sat exposed, a new contract for moving the bodies was never awarded. So what, did they just ignore this problem? In 1894, grading and leveling began in preparation for the park. Though several of the open graves wouldn't be filled until 1902, when shrubs were planted in many of them. The park was finally completed in 1907 without ever having moved the rest of the bodies. 2 years later, in 1909, Gladys Cheeseman Evans and her mother, Mrs. Walter S. Cheeseman, donated a marble pavilion in memory of Denver pioneer Walter Cheeseman. The donation was conditional that part of the parks be designated as Cheeseman Park, and so it was. The pavilion continues to stand today. In 1923, the bodies from the Hebrew burial ground were removed to other sites and the cemetery returned to the city, where the site currently serves as the site of the reservoir in Congress Park. The section once used as the Chinese cemetery was used as the city's tree and shrub nursery until 1930, when a WPA, that's Works Project Administration, project converted it to another addition for Congress Park. In 1950, the Catholic Church moved the remains of those interred at Mount Calvary Cemetery and sold the land back to the city, which is now the location of Denver's Botanical Gardens. The vast majority of the present-day Cheeseman Park was mostly the Protestant portion of the old cemetery. A residential community separates Cheeseman from Congress Park. Today, an estimated 2,000 bodies remain buried in Cheeseman Park. All this time has passed and no one's thought to fix that problem. Alrighty then. It comes as no surprise that the spirits of these forgotten, looted, and sometimes desecrated bodies continue to make their presence known, not only at Cheeseman Park, but in the neighborhood that surrounds it. Almost immediately, when the bodies began to be removed from the cemetery in 1893, strange things began to happen. One of the first reports was when a gravedigger named Jim Astor felt a ghost land upon his shoulders. Astor, who had been looting the graves as he moved the bodies, immediately ran from the graveyard and failed to return to work next day. Those living in residences surrounding the graveyard began to report sad and confused-looking spirits knocking at their doors and windows, as well as the sounds of moans coming from the still yet open graves. Today, these restless spirits are still said to occupy the park as dozens of tales continue to be told of paranormal activities taking place. Most visitors tell of feelings of unexplainable sadness or dread in a place that is today meant for pleasure and relaxation. But other reports are more specific, often including the sounds of hundreds of whispering voices and moans that continue to come from the fields where the open graves once lay. Children have been seen playing in the park during the night before they mysteriously disappear, and a woman is said to be seen singing to herself before she too suddenly vanishes. On some moonlit night, the outlines of the old graves can still be allegedly seen. Others have also claimed that after lying on the grass, they have found it difficult to get up, as if unseen forces are restraining them. Yet more reports tell of strange shadows and misty figures that seem to wander through the park in confusion. Cheeseman Park is located at Franklin and 8th Streets and is open from dawn until 11 p.m. At the end of the Cheeseman Park article, there's also this little story. It's called Slackjaw of Cheeseman Park, and it's by Lee Cook, the experiencer. So from his perspective, he states, I live and work only blocks from the infamous Cheeseman Park in Denver, Colorado, and I've heard stories of its haunted nature, but never thought much of it, until lately. One night, my friend Ruben and I decided to take a walk through the park. We walked across the south lawn to the pavilion, where there were several skateboarders making jumps on the sides of the old fountain, and other people walking about. We talked about work and about other mundane things as we strolled away from the old pavilion to the rose gardens, where there's a natural maze of huge rose bushes. Just then, I heard a rattling chain behind us and said, "Reuben, can you hear that?" As I looked around, he replied he hadn't heard anything. "There, I heard it again," I exclaimed as I heard the chain jingling. Still, he didn't hear it, and we could see no one. Continuing our stroll, we moved toward the middle of the big field where it was more open, and sat down in the cool grass to smoke a cigarette. Moments later, we were surprised when we saw a kid riding a bicycle with a chain dangling from his pocket, turning circles around a thin, pale man, dressed in what appeared to be a shredded hospital gown covered with blood. The pair moved towards us. To say the least, we were petrified. As they grew closer, I could see that the pale man's jaw was broken. He then approached us and asked for a smoke. I handed him a cigarette. He said, "Did you see them?" Dumbfounded, I simply replied, "Who?" "The ones that did this to me. They stabbed me 15 times, the man said. He then lifted his sleeves to show us what looked like very deep stab wounds in his arms, back, and chest. Horrified, I said, "Shouldn't you be at the hospital?" Shaking his head, he answered, "They let me go because I didn't have any money." He then warned us to watch out for them and stated several times, "I'm going to get them." When I reassured him that if we saw them, we would let him know, the pair casually moved away from us into the darkness. When we could see them no longer, Reuben and I quickly ran toward my apartment as fast as we could, never looking back. Afterwards, we talked about what we saw for a long time, both confident that we had seen and talked to the Walking Dead. So if you ever go out to Cheeseman Park at night, know that you just might be questioned by a ghost in a hospital gown who continues to look for his killers. I have dubbed the ghost Slackjaw. That was submitted by Lee Cook in November of 2005. And a footnote here, it says Lee worked at the King Soopers, that's near Cheeseman, and he lived in apartments right across the street from the park. Well, that was awesome and pretty creepy at the same time. I knew that Cheeseman Park was a repurposed graveyard, but I didn't know that there were so many bodies left buried there. Didn't know the detail about, chopping the bodies up. That was pretty gnarly. It's not really a place I ever go to at night since I live in the burbs. There's no reason for me to be there. But maybe someday the opportunity will present itself and I'll have an experience of my own. If you have any experiences, though, or stories of your own, I'd really love to hear about them. So head to thisiscolorado.net. You can either fill out the survey or email me directly at stephanie@thisiscolorado.net. As always, I look forward to hearing from you. So what do I hope that you learned from this episode? First, that there's so much to do here in the fall. We've got pumpkin patches, haunted houses, all the way over to enjoying the festivals that celebrate our unique foods. Second, dressing like a clown could get you shot, so don't do that. Lastly, that Cheeseman Park has a sordid history, and you could very well be playing frisbee or relaxing in the grass on top of some poor pauper's grave. Stay aware, my friends. Until next time.
This is Colorado.net, helping you create a day to remember.
We are always interested in what you, the listeners, have to say. If you'd like to share your experiences, adventures, destinations, unique Colorado eats, or people causing positive change who are passionate about what they do, tell us more at thisiscolorado.net or leave us a message at 720-733-1231 and we might feature it on an upcoming episode.
When you do what you've always done, you'll get what you always got.
If you found value in this episode, do us a favor and tell a friend. Completing our listener survey is a great way to give us feedback.
All of our links from this episode are in the show notes or at thisiscolorado.net. From one Coloradan to the next, this is Mike and Steph saying, keep it colorful, Colorado.